One of my soapbox things that I talk about a lot is how much the world doesn't prepare us for grief. It doesn't prepare us to handle it. Life doesn't prepare us to see that it happens. And no one tells us what's normal, what's not normal. Thankfully, one of the things I did learn as a child at Journey of Hope was all of these feelings that, like, grief isn't just sad. Grief is anger, grief is stress, grief is frustrated, grief is loneliness, all of these things. And so actually all of the learning about grief, for the most part, that I learned was not at school.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. I am so excited to have my friend Bryna today on our episode. Bryna and I met a year ago, actually, and it was in interesting circumstances. I was doing the training to become a facilitator for a nonprofit organization that helps people that are grieving, and Bryna was one of the presenters who shared her story. And we've been, collaborating in the last year, serving together in this capacity, and it's been so great to get to know this amazing young woman who I am so excited for her to now share her journey with all of you. So Bryna, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. It was when I saw you share your story at that training for Journey of Hope, which is the organization that we're both a part of. I was just so impressed, and your journey just really touched my heart. And I knew I made a list when I started this podcast of all the different people I'd be interviewing, and your name was on there.
Yes.
So I was so excited you said yes when I reached out for you to share your journey.
Absolutely.
I'm so happy. All right. So tell us a little bit about what it is you do right now. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So right now, I am the program manager for Journey of Hope, which is a grief support group for kids, teens, and their families after a loved one has died. I actually attended the program as a child. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I came back as a facilitator and had always wanted to give back to this organization. And then in August of 2019, I was given the opportunity to start working for Journey of Hope, which just brought everything full circle. And I think the first night of group that I did in Dallas, which is the group night that I run, was actually probably the same week that I started attending Journey of Hope 19 years before that. So it all just kind of came full circle, and I love being with our families and being able to just support them and to be with our amazing facilitators like Kendra. It's one of the things that really fills my bucket in my life.
I just got goosebumps. I'm sorry. I had to express 19, exactly 19 years. And that's part of the journey that we'll be talking about later. But yes. You also do, aside from the nonprofit organization that you're a part of, then you're also have a job, a job.
Yes.
So and tell us what it is you do.
So I am in private practice. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist associate at Curis Functional Health, which is a private practice in North Dallas. And our office really focuses on helping the whole human being. So each of our offices has mental health therapists, chiropractors, and nutritionists. So we really do the whole mind, body, gut health. Specifically in the practice, I work a lot with kids and teens and their families. I do specialize in grief and working with those who have lost loved ones, and not only traditional grief that is a result of a death loss, but also non-traditional grief, such as divorce, any life transitions, a new house, a new move, anything that's new, for kids and teens
Mm.
especially. I love being in the playroom with all of the little kids. They just bring me so much joy, and the things that they say are just so profound. And I obviously love my teens and my adults and my families. I love everybody that I work with. I'm so blessed and so fortunate.
That is awesome. And thank you for bringing that up of that you help people in other areas of grief, not just the loss of a loved one, because that is huge. And that is something that I do in this podcast too, is shine a light on all these other areas that people grieve through, in their life. And it's just life changes. And sometimes it's even happy ones.
Hmm.
Even I shared that even of myself, even when I became a mom, that was a
Right,
huge transition in my life. And had to kind of uh balance those emotions out
right.
as well. So thank you for that, for the services that you do, and for shining a light on that aspect. Now tell us then a little bit, then going back to then
Hmm.
19 years, or it's 19, well, it's going to be 20 years then,
Yeah.
this summer, um, of when you became a participant of this nonprofit organization, Journey of Hope.
Hmm.
Um, what was the major change in your life that had occurred?
Yeah. So my dad died on my fourth day of fourth grade. I was 9 years old, and he had had three heart attacks and actually been in the hospital for 10 months. He had had his first heart attack the October before he died, his second that December, and then the third in August, which was, and he died the next day. He had had a very long illness. He had been sick my whole childhood. It was actually more abnormal for my mom and I after he died to not be spending so much time in a hospital. It was just something that was a way of life for me. I went to physical therapy at the hospital with him a couple times a week, and I had his physical therapists were my friends from when I was like two
Mm.
on. I went through a lot of surgeries with my dad, and my mom and I had a really good routine of we would read books and play one specific game. And so this was just our way of life. I always had a backpack by my door that had a blanket and a pillow and an extra change of clothes and a book or different activity depending on how old I was. And so if we had to take my dad to the hospital in the middle of the night, my mom would holler in my room and go, "Brenna, grab your bag." And I go, "Okay." And I tootled myself to the back seat and go right back to sleep until we got to the hospital.
Wow.
So that was just a way of life for us. And when he died, my mom, I will always compliment my mom for this, but I am just so fortunate of how much, even as an 8 and 9 year old, she let me in on what was going on. She always told me age appropriately, "Okay, this is what's happened, this is what that means, and how do you feel about that? Do you have any questions?" So I was always very fortunate for that. And so even after my dad died, her first probably her first phone call after, the funeral home and all the things that you have to do after someone dies, was to Journey of Hope. And we were in groups within 2 or 3 weeks after his death. And at Journey
Wow.
of Hope.
Now, did, yeah, sorry
No,
to
you're fine.
interrupt. Did you already, your mom had already received this contact of this information then about Journey of Hope prior to his passing,
Yes. So,
for you guys to start so early on? So
yes.
how was that? How did she get that
What
information?
I assume happened, is that because the school and my mom kind of had a plan and set, we knew that my dad
Mm.
wasn't going to make it through the school year. He actually wasn't supposed to make it as long as he did. So we kind of knew, and she had a plan with our principal, my counselor, and who ended up being my homeroom teacher, that I actually got to choose a couple kids to be in my homeroom class so that I would feel comfortable going back to school whenever that transition happened. And so I'm sure it was my counselor or principal, because Journey of Hope was started by a lot of PISD counselors and people who work for Plano ISD. Um, that's where they got that information and how we were able to get that. So I assume that that's where she got that contact information from.
Okay. 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 So sorry. And I interrupted you
No,
when you
you're
were in the
fine.
middle of a train of thought. So you said within 2, 3 weeks, then you started going to Journey of Hope.
Yes, and I actually was very excited to be with other kids who understood kind of what I was going
Mm.
through. I had wonderful friends and a lot of adults who were looking after me and taking care of my mom and I and making sure that we were okay. But there was just something different about being with a group of kids who had also lost a loved one. And actually, at the time that I started Journey of Hope, the kids in the fourth and fifth grade class, we had all lost our dads. And so for a couple months,
Interesting.
there were like four of us in that group, and all of us had lost our dads. So we were really able to connect with that. And we were really truly able to empathize with each other of what we were going through. And that was honestly, Journey of Hope is where I always felt the safest to be able to talk about whatever I
Mm,
needed to talk about.
that is amazing. Now, how many years did you attend Journey of Hope at that time? So you were
Hmm.
9.
So,
How many years did you attend as a
yeah, so
participant?
my mom and I actually went for 5 years and we continued to go until the end of eighth grade. Well, really, when ninth grade was starting, because then my schedule just got even crazier and we just yeah
Sports? With sports or
with
things like
dance
that?
and Girl Scouts, and
Okay.
I was involved in a lot of activities, and we felt like we were okay. My grandmother, who served as a caregiver for me for my entire childhood, she actually died at
Mhm.
the end of eighth grade. And so we had
Oh, wow.
continued to go to Journey of Hope through the summer. And once our schedule got crazy, my mom looked at me and she said, "Do we need to continue to make this a priority? Are you okay?
Mhm.
Like, are we good to stop going? Because our schedule, we're not sure we can fit one other thing in, so something else would have to go." And I told her, I remember looking at her and saying, "You know what? I think that Journey of Hope had given us all it could because we had gone for so long
Mhm.
and met so many wonderful people, and we had learned the coping skills and um, the words to use with each other of how to
Mm.
express how we're feeling. Sometimes those words weren't always positive, but we did try our best to be able to
Mhm.
adequately express to each other how we were feeling about just anything, but particularly our grief. Emotions was not something that we were 100% great at, but Journey of Hope definitely gave us
Mm.
more skills to be able to communicate more empathetically and effectively.
With that.
Mm-hmm.
With each other. Now, it's you guys were a team. It's just the
Yeah.
two of you,
Yeah.
right? It was an only child.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was the two of you during that time,
Yeah.
and so this definitely was this extended family that you were able to kind of have. Aside, of course, you had your immediate family and your your I'm sorry, your grandmother, and then you have extended cousins
Mm-hmm.
and so forth as well,
Yes.
but at least your immediate family, it was your mom.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned of how that taking care of your dad had become your
Mm-hmm.
normal since you were 2 years
Yeah.
old. So even not having that part of your routine even after that, like when you turn 9, not only the fact of your dad having passed, but then that secondary loss, as we even talk about in Journey of Hope, sometimes those secondary losses that we have when we go through grief, of your routine completely changing
Yeah.
and you not being able to see all these therapists, that your dad was, the physical
Yeah.
therapist that your dad would see, and that was your other home.
Yeah.
How was that for you? How was that aspect of, whoa, what, I don't have to have a bag
Right.
next to my door anymore with
Right.
all my little stuff?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
It
like,
was
do
really
you
weird.
remember?
I do specifically remember, as I said, looking at my mom a couple months after he died, because we were still at the hospital a lot during those 10 months, and those nurses became my friends too, and I would trade back rubs for snacks out of the nurses station. I was I
Oh,
was
oh,
very
girl, if you're
resourceful.
I will trade you a back rub for a snack.
Hmm.
I'm constantly trying to bribe my kids to
Oh
give
yeah.
me a back rub.
Oh
So I'm
yeah.
like, I'll trade you.
Yeah, so it was honestly so weird, and my grandmother was there most of that 10 months, last 10 months that my dad was in the hospital, and I mean, this was in 99 into 2000, so she would have to go home. She lived in St. Louis at the time, to pay her bills, and then she would come
Mm.
back. So,
Oh, wow.
even when we got to the point that we didn't need her there all the time, even that was weird. It was
Mm.
just the two of us, and we were used to that for maybe a week or so at a time. But it was, and she and
Mhm.
I were very, very similar. So sometimes we'd be best friends.
You and your grandmother?
So
You
my
and your
yes,
grandmother, or you and
so me and my
your mom?
mom were
Okay.
very similar,
Oh,
and
okay.
we'd either be butting heads or like sharing
Mm-mm.
guacamole on the couch and watching TV together there. So
Mm-hmm.
we found that an interesting thing to have to kind of navigate, that it was just the two of us. And we sometimes even felt like the kind of insecurity of not having that man in the house. If you're used to, my dad was 6'5" and like a huge dude. And
Mm.
so just his presence, even though he was disabled and he wouldn't be able to,
Mm.
physically fight off anybody, just his presence and his voice was enough to, you would feel
To scare
safe.
somebody
Yeah,
off.
you felt
Yeah, yeah,
safe with him. And so we
yeah.
had a little bit of that transition of just like, man, it's all girls in this house. And not that we
Mm-hmm.
are like all girl power, don't get me wrong, but just missing that like
Mm-hmm.
6'5" presence in our house. So it was a very interesting transition. And then to have my grandmother coming in sometimes, and then she finally moved down here when I was in the 7th grade. And I don't think
Oh,
I
so,
ever went back
and
to
this
my
is
own
your
house.
mom's
So
mom?
this is my mom's mom. Mhm.
Oh, your mom's mom. So she'd come from St. Louis
Mhm.
to help you guys while you were going through everything with your
Yeah.
dad. So your mom's mom. And so you were actually then, so when she passed away, then when you were in 8th grade, she was here. So
Mhm.
she had also then become that very big presence
Oh
in your
yeah.
life again
Oh yeah.
because she was
Yeah,
here.
and she always had been, and even after the initial "we're okay," she would still come for a month or 2 at a time and still be here to help us. I mean, we mostly loved that she cooked. My mom had a great many strengths.
Hmm.
Cooking was not
Was
one
not
of
one of
them.
them.
And I mean, we ate spaghetti a lot. So we were always grateful for her to be here for that, and just to just be a very gracious and graceful presence in our house, because she was
Mm,
just so she thought through her words very well and was very graceful. And so she was a nice check-in for my mom and I when we would get
mm.
worked up, and she'd be like, okay, we're gonna take a minute, we're gonna calm down, we're gonna listen to some music, and then everything will be okay. So she had continued that. And then I was just so grateful when she finally decided to move down here. And I don't think I ever
Yeah.
went back to my own house. I think because she moved into a house at the other end of our neighborhood. And when
Uh-huh.
she moved, I kind of looked at my mom and was like, okay, bye. I'm going to Grammy's. So I really don't think I ever moved home after that. And then, well, and then she got her cancer diagnosis. So she moved September of my 7th grade year, and by August, going into 8th grade, she had a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. So at that point, my
Oh,
mom
it's the same.
was even moved in at that point, and we both had the opportunity to help her and be caregivers for her. And as tough as those days were, I wouldn't trade those either. Those were
For
some
the
great
world,
days.
yeah.
Yeah.
My mom, that was my mom's diagnosis as well, was pancreatic cancer. So I'm very familiar with that. How
Hmm.
many months was from diagnosis to passing
You
for
know
your,
what?
I
She
say months
she made
because
it
was it years?
she made it August to April. We got the stage 3, stage 4 diagnosis in August, and we actually had Christmas the week before Thanksgiving with the entire family because she wasn't supposed to make it to
Hmm.
Christmas. And that lady made it till the end of April, and she went far above and beyond. My mom and I had a trip to London planned as a school trip that spring break, and my mom looked at her and was like, "You can't die this week. Like, you can't." And so, I mean, she actually, I remember her telling my grandmother that as we were leaving, she goes, "You can't die this week." And I go, "Mom, that is like probably the most morbid thing I've ever heard you say." But
Uh,
but she hung on, and you know what? She died the one weekend in April that we didn't have anything going on.
Thought you were in town. Now, was she at that point when you both traveled? Was she in hospice at that moment?
She wasn't, and we never got to that point. She was doing
Oh,
okay.
okay.
We had one of my mom's really good friends was a nurse, and so when my mom was working,
Okay.
she'd check in on my Grammy, and my Grammy stayed pretty self-sufficient up right until the end. We'd have to help her
Oh,
move
that's
around a
impressive.
little bit, and she was done cooking, which was very sad, but she would tell us what to do. And so she was still at home and up and about, and she actually, the week before she died, had a stroke, and that's what
Mm.
put her in the hospital. And so it was actually the day that she died was the day that we had decided that, okay, this is kind of it. And we were talking
Mm,
about hospice, and I think she was just kind of like, nah, I'm good. And it was the day
mhm.
her youngest sister, was on the way to visit and to kind of say goodbye. My uncle, my mom's brother, had come in the weekend before while my mom and I were Girl Scout camping the weekend before, and he stayed
Mm.
with her that weekend. So he had his moment, and my Grammy died 2 hours after her sister got there. And she was just kind of like, okay,
Oh,
like, I'm good.
isn't it so beautiful how, yeah,
Yeah.
how sometimes they just wait for all everything to
Mm-hmm.
just kind of be in place and then be able to let go after they've said goodbyes. And I think a lot of times those gifts are really more for us,
Right.
right? It's like for that so that we have that
Right.
closure to some extent. So that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, so having experienced your dad's death when you were 9 and then you were now what,
So I
13,
was
8th grade,
14.
13,
Yeah. So I was
14?
14 when my Grammy
14.
died.
So how different, I mean, you had already then developed some tools
Mm-hmm.
of how to grieve, but of course as a child the way we view death is a little different than as a teenager. So how was it at that point for you then to manage your grief then, with the tools that you had, but also still with all these changes? How was it then for you?
Yeah, I think that one of the greatest things that I had at that point was that I could look at my mom and just say, "Hey, I just really need a minute to myself. And I need to go
Mhm.
upstairs." My safe place was upstairs in my room with Avril Lavigne blasting, and or I also had a drum set in my
Which
room.
song? Which song?
All of them.
Which song
All
could
of
you, let's
them.
see, let
I'm trying to think. Of course, I
I
still
know it's
listen
so
to them
funny. I
on
was trying to think.
Spotify in my car. But
Oh,
of
cool.
course, I mean,
I
what
know she hasn't come up with
I
anything
know.
lately,
I
right? She
know.
hasn't. Yeah, yeah. It's been a
We
long
need some
time.
new jams. Um,
I heard Fiona Apple came out with something
really?
recently, and I'm like, wait, I haven't even heard of Fiona Apple in a long time.
What?
Yeah, yeah. So,
That's a wild.
so maybe Avril will make her
Maybe.
come
I
back.
hope so, man. But I mean, what
Uh,
teenage girl also doesn't have a band in middle school? So I actually had a drum set in my room. And so I
oh,
would
cool.
bang the crud out of my drums. Avril would be blasting. My mom didn't care. She's like, "Girl, you do you." Because she would
Mm,
express in different ways in which the drums was very helpful to drown it out. So
yeah.
we kind of had established, like, these are our safe places. It's okay for us to take a break from each other, and
Mm,
just to allow ourselves to process and to just kind of look at her and go, "Mom, today's a really tough day." And she go, "Yeah." Or if she was really worked up and she picked me up from school and I could tell she was mad or angry, I kind of look at her and be like, "What kind of mad or angry are you? Like, is
mm,
this are you mad because you're just mad that we're on our own? And this your grief talking, or is this something else talking?" And so we were able to kind of have a better understanding of each other, because we did have a very, like, us against the world attitude. I do remember we were on the way home. We flew up and we buried my Grammy in St. Louis with my granddad. And we get on the flight and we get settled, and she kind of looked at me and she goes, "It's just you and me now, kid." And I looked at her, I was like, "Oh man." She goes, I was like,
mm,
this might hurt a little bit. She goes, "Yeah, we'll just do our best." So I think the fact that we both
mm.
allowed each other some grace and were able to just go, "Okay, today it is what it is. We're giving up. We're eating ice cream for dinner. Tomorrow will be hopefully a better day."
I think that that is so important, and I'm sure that that's something that you, as a therapist associate, that you do, and with counseling and stuff, and also as a facilitator and in Journey of Hope, is the fact of just allowing those emotions to be what they are
Mm-hmm.
and not trying to change them either, and knowing that everybody has a different way of expressing them,
Mm-hmm.
and that is I think huge. And a lot of times that whole thing of like, let me try to be strong, I want to be strong right now.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that aspect of trying to be strong, like, that the strong, that I always hear that word
Yeah.
when
Be
when
strong.
we're going through grief,
Be
like I
strong.
want, yeah, either people tell us to be strong or that we put that burden on ourselves that we
Exactly.
want to be strong for the rest of us. So what are your thoughts around that word
Yeah,
of
you know
strong
what?
or around
I
grief?
felt that a lot more after my Grammy died, because I was still fairly young enough when my dad died that there were things. I mean, I really developmentally, the way that I was strong was that I would choose to not get in trouble. And so I really
Mm.
was a big, and still am, I'm a huge rule follower, and I always stay kind of in the lines because I didn't want to be the one that set mom off, and I didn't want to make her upset, and I didn't want her to cry because that made me upset. And so I kind of made it my goal after 9 to be like, okay, you can do this. You're in charge of your actions and you have to do that. So I think as a 9-year old, that's how I felt be strong. When I was
Mhm.
14, I I knew from then on in I parentified myself a lot. And by the time that I went to college, my mom and I were much more of like partners and roommates than we were mother and kid. Part of
Mhm.
that is a little bit normal. Like you, as your children developmentally get a little bit older and they need you for the, mother,
Different
like
reasons. Yeah.
they need you in different
Mhm.
ways. You're
Mhm.
more of a business manager
Yes.
than you are go brush your teeth, go wash your hair. When was the last time you showered? Things like that. Because as a
Agreed.
teenager, well, sometimes you still have to tell them to shower, but you know what I mean. So we had developmentally gotten to that point. So I think I just got there a little bit faster. I got a job as soon as I could so I could
Mhm.
help her pay bills because I knew that money was always tight when you're a single parent. And she was doing her best to provide for me the life that she'd always dreamed of her kid having. And so I tried to contribute to that. And I never asked for money, I never asked for extra things. Um, and so I think my version of be strong was be independent and
Mhm.
don't be the burden. And so obviously
But it was never
sometimes
about holding your emotions back. It was
uh,
never about the holding back your emotions, or do you think you still kinda
I
tried
kind of
to
did.
hold back?
I really,
Mhm.
really disliked seeing my mom cry. That was the only one of the
Mm.
only times that I would ever cry. Not because I wasn't allowed to, just because I think I was just done crying by then. I had done it
Mhm.
enough and I was good. And even now that's something I still struggle with. But I think that
Mm.
I that was one of the reasons why I had the kind of be strong mentality was I didn't like seeing her upset. And so I had
Mhm.
no problem getting angry. Anger was a thing that was allowed. We both had it. We expressed it. And then we'd look at each other and be like, great, you ready for some food? Are you ready for Chick-fil-A? And I'd be like, sure, let's go. So that was an
Mm.
emotion we had, frustrated, stressed. Those were all things that we like allowed. Happy, obviously. I think people always forget
Mhm.
happy. But the sadness was the one that I didn't want to allow.
Even though it was probably coming out reflected again in anger, it
Right.
was just the way it was being reflected, the sadness, the way it was showing up
Hmm.
was in
Right.
anger and frustration,
It
but
wasn't
the
tears.
maybe underlying, yeah, the underlying emotion behind that expression was probably still sadness
Exactly.
and missing, than usual.
Exactly.
Now, you and your mom were this dynamic duo then for many of your
Yeah.
years. You graduated from high school and then you started college
Yeah.
and you decided to go into being studying counseling.
Hmm.
Is what is your
Yeah. So
is that
yeah. So I went into
psychology?
SMU wanting to do something psychology related. At that point, I thought I
Hmm.
wanted to do dance therapy. I had grown up from fourth grade on dancing 15, 20, 30 hours a week. It was my full time job besides school. And it was just something that I wanted to be able to combine my passion of helping others with my passion of dance. Part of that went away when I started having a lot of hip problems because many of us who dance this long start deteriorating by our early
Was
to
it
mid
ballet?
20s.
What kind of
Yeah,
was it ballet?
I did a lot of ballet, a lot of
Classical. Hmm.
lyrical, jazz, hip hop. I wasn't great at, but then I was also on drill team in high school, so that's a lot of kicking. It's a lot of
Hmm.
jump splits, so a lot of stuff on my hip joints. So that's
Hmm.
what I went into college wanting to do was to help to help people be able to express through dance. That was my goal.
Hmm.
Um,
Or through drumming really loud,
through
or through
drumming
drumming.
really loud. Yeah, I actually took a music therapy class my sophomore year and I loved it because there was a day we were drumming and I was like, I'm banging the crud out
This
of
is
these.
home.
Yeah, like I
Yeah,
am
you're like,
good
this
right
is how
here.
I know this.
Exactly. Um,
So then that's how you went in, and then how did it develop then? How did it change then?
yeah.
And when you decided that it was not gonna be then through dance therapy, how did that kinda change?
Well, what changed was then my mom died. And so
S
sophomore year,
And this is you were how
so I
old?
was
Sophomore,
19.
okay.
So sophomore year, it was November of sophomore year of college. And I had never wanted to go to SMU. SMU was too close.
Mm,
When you grow up in Plano and you can get on 75 and be in Dallas in 25 minutes, way too close. Um, but I was very thankful that that's where I ended up. And there were a lot of twists and turns that got me there. But the fact that I was able to still be physically close to my mom that last, I guess, like 16 months that I was in college was actually one of the biggest blessings I think I had. And she had had a short illness. Her death was very unexpected. And um, it was that completely rocked my world. And for as solid as I always thought I was, of like emotions can't get me, I'm driven, this is what I'm doing, it took a really long time to kind of at least get to the point where I could accept her death, because I think it was so
mm,
unexpected. And the other two, I was ready. Like with my dad, I knew. With my grandmother, I knew. With my mom, it just was out of left field. And she was an older mom.
mm,
So she was a month shy of being 60 and I was 19. And so, but it had never crossed my mind. She had never acted her age ever. And the thought never crossed my mind that she wouldn't just be this crazy old lady like living in my house when I'm 40. Like that was just how
mhm.
it was supposed to be. So she died the week before Thanksgiving, and after the services, and I actually went to Florida with my extended family for 2 months to just kind of regroup and see what I was supposed to do next. If I was going to go back to SMU, if I was going to transfer to a school in Orlando, just kind of figuring out what am I going to do. And I did make the decision to come home, and so then I was completely by myself for the most part. I
'Cause there's nobody
because there
here.
were there were
Is there anybody here in Texas
I do have some extended, some
now?
of my dad's family lives in the area,
Okay.
and my boyfriend, now husband, was here, and his
Yeah.
family, and all of
Mhm,
our friends, because it was just my mom and I, had become our family. They were very important to
mhm.
us. I feel like there were probably 15 keys of our house made that people just had.
For everybody?
Yeah, because
I hope they knocked before they
right,
showed
they
up.
they'd at least call and be like, "Hey, we're on our way over," because but
"Put some pants on,
right,
girl, I'm coming
seriously,
over."
seriously. But our house was always, it was always an open house. All the parties, end of the year parties were at our house. All the New Year's parties were at our house. I mean, for two people living in this house, it was always full of somebody.
Ha Now, how did that change then too? The fact that then your home was kind of the hub for everybody around. Did that change when your mom passed
Yeah,
away?
because
Did that
well,
dynamic
because we did have
change?
to. I couldn't stay in the house. It was not.
Oh,
We couldn't make that happen, and so
mhm,
and that was fine because I had a room at SMU for
mhm,
8 9 months of the year. So my husband's parents graciously had all of my stuff in their house. I think they still have stuff of mine in their house that we're still constantly trying to clean out. But we had a lot of help in our community with Girl Scouts through our church, of people coming together, helping us get stuff out of the house. I have 4 storage units at one point because when you're in the depths of all this grief, like how is it? Because it was my mom's house and
How
my
do you get
grandmother's house,
yeah,
so I
how
had
do
all
you
my
get
I had my mom's
yes.
stuff and my
How do
grandmother's
you get
stuff. So I was like, how do you go through this in like two
No,
weeks
no, no.
to figure out what you want? So I was very thankful to have people step up and they're like, well, we'll pay for your storage unit for a year. I'm like, wonderful. Thank you so much. And so it allowed me time because I had to kind of be on autopilot for a while. I was able to
Mhm,
kind of sort of feel while I was in Florida, but my cousins have always been great distractors. That's just what they're really good at. They make me laugh. I love being with them. And we had 2 babies in the area at that time. So I just occupied myself with the 2 month olds that didn't talk. It was great. I spent
mhm.
my days by our pool. I'm like, and I had been so used to going to Florida for extended like weeks and 2 weeks at a time, just to so my uncle would said my uncle would have me come out there to give my mom a break, and just because it was fun and I wouldn't have to work, I wouldn't
Mhm.
have to worry about anything. It was going to Disney and going to Universal and hanging by the pool and going to the beach and going out on the boat. And so I was able to like,
That was your
that
second
was my second
home. That was
home.
your second
And
home.
so
Yeah.
to me,
Mhm.
that 2 months there really didn't have much grief involved other than having to make some really hard
Mm.
choices, because to me that was normal for me to be there. I
Mm.
stayed in the same room that I always stayed in. I sat out on the same lanai. I went to the same Disney. Like it just felt like kind
Mhm.
of a vacation. So it wasn't until I came home that I started actually feeling, but then I had to be on autopilot because I was still making all of these really big decisions as a 19.
As a 19-year
Yeah.
old. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So I was very grateful for the people that I had surrounding me, and everybody was super wonderful. But then that's when I kind of decided to switch. It was actually when I was in Florida. I was visiting my cousin that lived in Savannah, and she kind of looked at me. She goes, why do you think you've been given all this stuff? Like, why do you think you in
Mm.
particular have been
Mm.
given all of this grief? And I said,
Mm.
I don't know, because right now somebody really hates me. And she goes, no, no. Like, think
Mm.
about it.
Mm.
What,
Mm.
why do you have all this stuff? She goes, you've always been a very giving person. You've always wanted to give back. How are you supposed to do that? And so it was then that I realized that I wanted to help other people who have lost loved ones. And I decided
Mm.
that with my three losses, I could not only provide the empathetic actual experience to clients and to people who I work with, and then adding in all of the education and all of the background that I now have on all the different theories and all of the data and all of that. So I was able to come back and look at my advisor and go, this is what I want to do. Help me get there. And he would
Mm.
go, okay, this is what we're doing. And my advising appointments were never 15 minutes. They were always at least an hour because I always had something going on. I remember my
Mm.
junior year, first day, second semester, junior year, I had gone back to my husband's parents' house to get the rest of my stuff from winter break. I was driving back to SMU. It was like 9 o'clock. I'm on 75 and my car literally stops working. Just stops working at the 635 75 merge. And I go, okay. I throw my
Uh,
hazards.
Another one.
Just like,
Yeah.
okay, what do I do now? And so thankfully, like an
Yeah.
NTTA truck like was coming down the ramp. They saw me. They helped me move my car. The tow truck was conveniently 2 minutes behind them. And so I called Michael and I go, okay, well, my car just died in the middle of 75. Can you go meet it at the car place? He goes, yeah, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to school. He goes, how are you going to school? I'm like, the NTTA guys are taking me to school. I go, could you please bring me all my stuff? He goes, I guess. So I actually had my advisor. I got there for my 9:30 class. I got there at 9:33, and I was running into class with all the stuff I could carry out of my car. And he just kind of looks at me and goes, do we need to have a conversation after class? I go, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be awesome.
But talk about commitment, girl.
I was like,
First of
I'm
all,
going
talk
to
about
school.
commitment. Doesn't matter. My car broke down. I'm making
No,
it.
I was getting
That
to
is
that
a
conflict resolution class. It was going to happen, and the NTTA guys took me to school.
Mm.
So I think
Love
I
it.
was just so thankful and so blessed to have as many people supporting me and rooting me on as I did. And so, what better way to be able to honor these three people and to give back to this community
Mm.
than to be doing what I'm doing now? And
That is
hopefully
just
more. We're at
a
the beginning of
huge
the
gift.
journey.
Oh,
Um,
no, yeah. Well, it never really ends, right? Giving, yeah,
right.
you're giving back. You just have started your career as a how many years have you been
So
now as a
I've been
counselor?
licensed almost 3 years, and I've been
Hmm.
a part of Journey of Hope as an adult for 6 or 7. I can never keep track. Um,
As a volunteer, and then almost 1 year as a an
yeah,
employee
yeah.
now as well. That is amazing. And you know what your cousin said about
Mm-hmm.
why did you how it's so interesting because a lot of times, like what you said, oh, well, someone must just hate me, type
Mm-hmm.
of thing. A lot of times we think that those things are there as punishment when
Right.
really they're gifts. And as hard as it may seem to think, they may be gifts for our own growth, but a lot of times it's just so that we have something to give back to the rest of the world. And you are a perfect example of what it looks like to go through something so hard and then turn it into blessings
Hmm.
and be able to give to so many now. So that is amazing. I want to ask you a just a couple
Yeah,
questions regarding study. When you were studying then and learning all this when you were in college, um, and learning about grief and seeing it as a technical perspective, it's a collage,
right.
it's a collage. How was that experience, having that you had already gone through it, like, and then seeing the psychology behind grief and that process, and were you self-analyzing
Oh,
yourself?
of
Like,
course.
how did that go?
Oh, of course. I do have to say there's I one of my soapbox things that I talk about a lot is how much the world doesn't prepare us for grief. It doesn't
Mhm.
prepare us to handle it. Life doesn't prepare us to see that it happens. And no one tells us what's normal, what's not normal. Thankfully, I mean, one of the things I did learn as a child at Journey of Hope is all of these feelings that, like, grief isn't just sad. Grief is anger, grief is stress, grief is frustrated, grief is loneliness, all of these things. And so, actually, all of the learning about grief, for the most part, that I learned was not at school. It was, I'm a part of a couple different organizations. One of them is the Association for Deaf Educators and Counselors, which sounds really morbid, but they're a great group of humans. I was a part of a group called Actively Moving Forward, AMF, which was a college grief support group. And they allowed me the opportunity to not only go to the AMF conferences and learn more and meet people there, but they also helped me get to the ADEC conferences so that I could learn more because they knew what I wanted to do. And then I've learned a lot from different organizations. The National Alliance of Grieving Children has a lot of different education. The Dougie Center has a lot of education. So a lot of what I've learned about grief came outside of the classroom. But I do have to, and so learning it, looking at these different grief models, there are no stages of grief. That's not a thing. That's
Mhm.
I And so
Yes,
it took
there.
me a yeah.
Hallelujah. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you for saying
it took
it.
me a very long time to find a way of talking about grief that actually made sense to me, because
Mhm.
even when was this? So I guess even like 6 or 7 years ago, the 5 stages were still something that people talked about often.
Mhm.
And so what I discovered was I really fitted with Worden's 4 tasks of mourning. There are 4 tasks. You can do them over and over again, and you will do them over and over again. You don't have to do them in any specific order. And
Okay, what are
I
those?
always
I have
talk
never
about
heard of
this
these
and then
4
I
tasks.
always forget at
I
least one of them. So I'm going to pull up.
Okay, let's
So
see. Yeah,
one
let's see what.
is the first one is to accept the reality of the loss and that that person is gone. That is something I think that we all do every day. Even 20, 15, and 10 years later,
Mhm.
there's probably few mornings that something doesn't happen in which I could call one of these people. And so I'm constantly reminded of the reality that these people are not here. I always say that the first
Mhm.
time you accept that is the hardest, and it takes a
Mhm.
while. And for me with my mom, it took me coming home, because when I was in Florida, everything was a party. And yeah, we were talking
Mhm.
about tough stuff, but we were talking about it on the boardwalk of Disney. Like, how could that be bad?
Mhm.
So
But coming to an empty house,
coming
but when
home
you
to an
came to
empty
an empty
house that you
house,
then have to clean out and
yeah,
realize that,
make
right,
decisions. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that was.
Task two is to work through the pain of the grief. Also, something that never goes away. You will always be working through the
Mhm.
pain of the grief. It just, for me, it doesn't come up as often as anymore. Next week, with Mother's Day capping off the end of next week, I will be a complete
Mhm.
basket case. And just because I think our bodies kind of know these important days a little bit more than we do sometimes. And I was kind of having a weird week this week, and I remembered that actually on Wednesday was the 15 years since my Grammy had been gone. It took me till the end of the day to realize, like, why do I just feel weird today? Like, what's
Oh,
off?
because it's April, right?
Hmm.
Because it's April. You're right.
So
You said she
that's,
passed away in
yeah, so
April.
that's something that
Mm,
you are always working through, and that's not something that ever really goes away. Task 3 is to adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing. So with my dad, it was putting away the hospital backpack.
mm,
It was,
mm-hmm,
we had a couple handy, like disabled things in our house that just helped him a little bit more. Those were all gone. When my Grammy, when she died, we had a wheelchair and a walker at the house, and then those were gone. And so just even those small adjustments of just realizing that person isn't here. So adjusting to the physical environment as well as the social and emotional environment in which, like, my Grammy was my person for a very long time, and that's the person that
mm.
was really constant. And I'd look at her and be like, today sucks. She goes, great, what kind of ice cream would you like? And so then it took my mom a while to catch on to, like, that was, you're supposed to be the
Talk about
response.
talk yeah, talk about food being comfort, being
Oh yeah.
taught as
Oh yeah.
comfort in your
Oh yeah.
family.
Food is our
We can
thing.
have that conversation at another time.
Food, totally our thing. This week, having a rough week, did I have a lot of chocolate? Yes, I did, but it's okay. Task 4 is to find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life. And so that's where
Mm,
I think you kind of, that's your, like, sunshine and your sunrise after the big storm, and you've been through these months, could be years, of just trying to work through this pain and sitting in the pain and just having it consume you so much, and then to finally look at your life and go, how can I embark on a new life while having an enduring connection with my loved ones? And that's
mm,
the task. When I finally read these, that I was like, that's what I'm doing. I said, that's
mm,
what makes this different, because this grief doesn't go away.
mm,
I mean,
mm.
I have a picture. I'm at my desk right now, and I have a picture that I drew for our Journey of Hope Facebook Live a couple weeks ago of, like, my mom. And I've thrown away all the other projects we've done for Facebook Live, but this picture that I drew, that's like, it looks like a 6-year old drew it, but it's sitting here
But
on
it
my
was you
desk.
now. It's not. So this is not one that you
No,
drew
this
when
was
you were
literally a
9. This
month
is one
ago.
now.
It was a month ago for one of the Facebook
That's me.
Lives.
Stick
Yeah.
figures.
And so it's
Yeah.
just
That.
sitting here on my desk, and I have different pictures throughout my house. I'm very thankful that there is a picture of me and my husband with my mom, and that sits on our
Mm-hmm.
bookshelves. And each one of them has a shelf. I have a dad shelf, I have a mom shelf, I have a couple mom shelves because she has a lot of stuff, but and then I have a
Mm.
grandmother self. And so just finding that enduring connection, I have a lot of pictures. I'm very grateful for that. The amount of money my parents spent on duplicates and triplicates of these pictures when I was growing up. Sometimes I get very
Now you see the
frustrated.
value.
And
Now
sometimes I'm
you see
like,
the value.
okay, just get rid of the duplicates. No one needs them. But there are moments that I'm just like, I just need to take a minute and just look at those and remember some of those things. So that's where we live.
I love those.
Hmm.
I love those. I had never heard of all those of that particular way of mourning, and those make so
So
much
much
sense.
sense.
Those make so much sense because there isn't really any order, and I say this all the time. It's not like just accept and that that
The
whole thing
denial,
of the why,
yeah,
yeah,
the
why me,
questioning, the
yeah.
bargaining.
It Right. No, it does, and even if they happen, they don't happen in any order.
Right,
So I don't. Yeah, there's not really steps, right? Because if they don't happen in order, they're not really steps.
right.
But and these right here, these also just kind of are just a process too. They're not necessarily even in an order either. But it to some or do you feel like these particular four do come in a
I
process
think
of
that, like,
acceptance of
I
this,
think
and that
acceptance has
connection
to
kind of is like
happen.
closure? Yes.
Like that, I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
that has to happen first,
Mhm.
because you can't
In
truly
order to be able to
grieve
create.
and
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
those things until you have accepted. So really, I do think that has to come first, but I do also think that we
Mhm.
can feel pain without labeling it as grief yet. And so
Mhm.
I do
Yes.
think that acceptance does have to come first, but I also love that even though the fourth task seems all inclusive and kind of the final step, it doesn't disclude the fact that we're always still working through the pain of our grief.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think that that's why I think these are so nice. And yes, they're in a great order. The way he ordered them
That
was
is
a great
perfect.
order, but there's an emphasis on this doesn't happen always in order. And there's nothing that says you can't go back and revisit these
Mm.
things over and over and over
Mhm.
again. Um,
Yeah, because sometimes also there's triggers, there's things
yeah.
that end up coming up in our grief that are different, like a different aspect of the grief ends up coming up, which I'm assuming even when you got married, even though you had been with your boyfriend,
Oh,
even
yeah.
like getting married was right
Yeah.
there, a huge happy
Hmm.
moment that brought up also some aspects of
Yeah.
grief because you didn't have your mom, your dad, or your grandmother by your side on this special
Right.
day. So you're kind of having to reevaluate.
Yeah. And
I'm gonna make
graduation
sure
was
to take
tough
all
too.
these websites. Oh,
And
graduation.
graduations,
Oh,
because like
yeah, okay.
what's funny is my husband was at my high school graduation and my undergrad
Oh, you guys
graduation
have been together
and my grad
forever.
school
You guys have been
graduation.
together
Yeah,
forever.
we yeah. And so at high school he's just like, "Okay, we're buddies, like we're friends. I'm just here to celebrate you, no big deal." He told me that after, and this was after actually my grad school graduation, that he told me this. He looked at me at my undergrad graduation. I actually couldn't look at him while all
Mm,
graduation stuff was going on, because I was like, if I look at you, I'm going to lose it. And so I just like
mm,
stayed straight ahead and was like, all right, don't, just focus. So he said he felt more like a parent at that graduation, because he was the one that
mhm,
was like, Brenna,
mhm.
do your homework. Like, you have to take this test. You have to study. Because I was A, so distracted, and B, I was still working 30 hours a week all through college.
Mm,
Just so I could, like, pay some bills. Like, I had a phone bill still and
mhm.
some things. But he said that my grad school graduation, it was 2 months, 3 months before we got married. He was like, I got to feel like a partner there. I was so excited. Um, so in those moments too, and I mean, I lost it at all three of my graduations. And at my high school graduation, I knew my dad wasn't going to be there, and I was going to, he called SMU,
Mm.
SMNU, and I was going there, and I knew just how excited he would be. But these things will come up. And I think with my wedding, like, I think dress shopping, that was
Mm.
that was the hardest day of. I was like, we are
Who
getting
went
married
with
and
you?
we
Who
are
went
going to
with
the
you?
beach. My mother-in-law went, so I didn't want a whole lot of people because I knew
Mhm.
I would be really overwhelmed. So my mother-in-law went, and
Yeah.
my maid of honor came with me. And then had two appointments scheduled. And after the first one, I was so overwhelmed that my maid of honor called her mom and was like, I need you to get here, because her mom, is a nice surrogate mom for me. And she was just like, no, we're
Mhm.
not doing that. We're not picking this dress. We're picking something else. So I did have some good support with that. But by the wedding, I was like, we are getting married. I was also really sick. So I was just like, please, someone get me out of this dress. I would like to go home. I hadn't packed us for our honeymoon yet. So I was like, let's get married. Let's have a party. And let's go to the beach. Like,
Wait, and
let's
you were
go.
sick and you were
I woke
sick?
up.
You were
Yeah,
sick
oh
on
yeah.
your honeymoon?
Because I had worked so much leading up to that, we decided to move on Wednesday. We got married Saturday. I woke up Wednesday with a sore throat. Saturday morning of our
The
wedding,
stress.
yeah, and was still working and all of those things,
Mm.
and trying to finish my hours for grad school. And Saturday morning, I'd spent the night with my maid of honor, and I texted her at 6 a.m. I go, I'm up. I need everything in the cold and flu aisle. Like, let's go. She goes, yep, me too. Here we go. So both of us had a lot of medicine in our system, just trying to make it through the day that day. But it was still a really great day. But I knew just at the end of it, I was
Okay.
just so excited to be who I was going to be with at the end of the day. So that was all that mattered at that point. So it was a
Oh.
lot of the planning and leading up to it that I think was the worst.
That brought up some of those
Mm-hmm.
feelings. Now, I'm gonna have to get all these different websites from you to be able to put
Yes.
in the show notes because all these links to all these resources that you mentioned, because it's like a whole bunch of nuggets here
Mm-hmm.
of tools that other people can use. And it's been
Yes.
so amazing, even just to learn through you about all these different aspects. And I'm sure the listeners were like, wait, let me rewind that. So don't
Exactly.
worry, we'll put in the show notes and the bottom, all the links. So I'll make sure to get those from you. And Brenna, this has been
Yes,
amazing.
this has been
I
fun.
thank you so much. Thank you so
You're
much for
welcome.
sharing all this journey and again showing how you can take lemons and make lemonade
Absolutely.
like you did.
Absolutely.
And make the best out of what you got and your situation, and make sure that you're giving back to all these other now kids and teens with your empathy as well as with your knowledge, helping them navigate through their grief. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful gift that you're giving
Yes,
back.
I love it.
Thank you so much, dear. I'm so
Thank you
excited
for
that
having
you were
me.
on.
This has been great.
Thank you, love. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.